Valerio had been there for more than 15 years. Years working in a municipal crematorium. Its routine was silent, mechanical, almost anesthetized. The place smelled of cheap disinfectant, and the sound of metal hitting the stretchers was the closest thing to a conversation daily. He lived alone since his mother passed away, and although at first it was hard, I had learned to live together with the death as someone who lives with the noise of traffic, resigned. Nothing surprised him. Nothing. It was moving. Until that Tuesday, when you assigned the body of Mrs. Lucia Ramirez, a 65-year-old woman who, according to the part, there was died of cardiac arrest. No one that there was accompanied. Nobody had asked about her. Valerio, as usual, murmured a rest in peace before opening the bag and placing it on the iron. Was in that moment when something uncomfortable, a fold in the dress, was sticking out, as if something was hidden in the fabric. Valerio frowned. He frowned. By protocol, he had to check that there were no personal belongings, so he approached and rummaged carefully. What he found, the breathing. A small, crumpled paper with shaky letters. He said, "Please don't cremate me." He felt a chill that toured back. His first impulse was to think it was a cruel joke, or perhaps a madness written before the death. But then, obeying something he didn't understand, he touched the hand of the woman. She was warm. She pressed carefully. The doll, and it felt a pulse, weak but undeniable. Doña Lucia was not there dead, and in at that moment, Valerio's orderly and grey world came crashing down. Below. Snap History T touched he heart, subscribe to the channel. We need more people to listen these beats. For a few seconds, Valerio stood paralyzed, with the paper still between the fingers and the heart pounding in his chest as if he wanted to escape. He didn't know whether to scream, run, or just sit down and cry. He breathed deep, trying to think with clarity. The crematorium was empty, like almost always. There were no doctors, nor nurses, nor not even a supervisor. The protocol stated that before any irregularity should communicate with the central, but there was no signal. No phone fixed, no coverage in the cell phone. He cursed in a low voice. He thought in seeking help in the nearby hospital, but I couldn't leave Lucia alone. What if her heart stopped again? What if it disappeared? Some test. There was something in his closed eyes, in his serene expression, which begged him not to leave her. So he did the only thing that is left to him. It happened. To wet a cloth with water cold and start moistening it the forehead. Was in the midst of that moment of despair when I'm listening, the front door slams open. A young man, about 30 years, with the eyes swollen with tears, burst in the enclosure. "Already, the cremated. Please tell me you didn't." "They did," he exclaimed, panting. Valerio sat up suddenly, still with the cloth in the hand. "Who are you?" he asked cautiously. "I am his son, adopted. My name is Guillermo," he said. The boy, approaching with steps trembling. His eyes fell in the body on the stretcher, and a mixture of relief and horror crossed his face. "She's alive, thank God." Valerio frowned. He frowned, confused. You knew I wasn't there, dead?" he asked. William came down the look and nodded in silence. "I put the note. I didn't know what else to do. I was following. They wanted kill her. I needed time. And you tell us gave without know it." Valerio felt that all his body tensed. Who they wanted kill her, what was really happening, looked fixedly, waiting for an explanation. Guillermo, with hands still trembling, approached the wall and left fall to the ground. "We don't have time. If they find out she's still alive, they're going to try again. I know because I already did once. Myself, I found unconscious in your bed with foam in the mouth. The doctors, they said it was a stroke, but I saw the bottle of pills changed, and it disappeared the next day next. When I wanted to report it, they threatened me. They took everything from me. They only left me bring her here quickly as if it were garbage. Not even they wanted a decent coffin." Valerio felt a pang in the chest. I didn't understand at all, but there was something in the voice of that young man who, it was profoundly true. He made an impulsive but firm decision. "Come on, help me lift her up." Between the two of them, with great care, placed Doña Lucia on a stretcher with wheels and the covered with a blanket. Valerio used a side door that led to his private car. No one the saw leave, drove without speak, following the Williams' instructions to a small house in the outskirts of the city. It was a dwelling simple but clean, with closed curtains and a bed made up. In the room, there, they laid Lucia down. Guillermo laid her down, arrangement tenderly. He spoke into her ear and caressed the cheek. "You're safe now, Mom," he whispered. Valerio watched silently, moved by the scene. I had never had children, no wife, no family. But seeing that bond, something inside him stirred. He sat down on a chair, old woman, and murmured, "Now you explain everything to me. From the principal." Guillermo nodded, breathed deep, and began to speak. "It makes 10 years gone. I lived in the street. I was sleeping in a park, ate what I found. I didn't know anyone. One day, a woman approached with a bag of bread and a thermos of coffee. It was Doña Lucia. She looked at me without fear, as if already knew everything about me. And he said to me, 'You were not born to be alone.' He took me to his house. He gave me a room, clothes, books. He taught me how to live again. He legally adopted me when I fulfilled 20. It was the first person to call me son without expecting anything in return." He paused, wiping away a tear. But his biological children, he never accepted. Eva and Ricardo, 2 snakes, never visited. But when they found out about the adoption and the will, they went crazy. They started pressuring her, yelling at her, making her feel guilty. And then came the poison. Valerio listened silently, increasingly incredulous. "And why didn't you report them?" he asked, almost angrily. "Because they are powerful," William replied. "They have contacts. The family business is large, very known. Nobody would believe me. When I tried talkie, they said I just wanted stay with the inheritance. They called me crazy. They admitted her in a clinic where almost the kill. I managed to take it out, but soon after that they poisoned at home. They called a doctor friend of theirs, and they arranged everything to declare her dead. I only managed to leave the note in his clothes before they will take." Valerio went hands for the face. "And if I don't get to see it, if I don't check that paper," Guillermo said, looked with the eyes full of gratitude. "You the saved, sir. I don't know as thank you." The days following were a mixture of tension and hope. Lucia woke up slowly, confused but alive. She had the voice weak, the muscles numb, but his gaze kept that spark that there was unique fact for Guillermo. Valerio visited the house every night after of the work, carrying medicine, food, and sometimes just silence. No one knew about his involvement. He maintained the cameras of the crematorium turned off, modified the records, and pretended that everything had followed protocol. But the fear was still present. One morning, William found the lock forced. They had not been brought nothing, but someone had entered. Valerio installed a bolt new and stayed overnight the sofa with a flashlight and a kitchen knife. It was no longer just a worker lonely. He was part of something bigger, of a family. Do you feel that something in Did You Move Too? So stay with us, subscribe, and join us in each history. One afternoon, while they took tea in the room, Lucia took Valerio's hand. "Why do you do all this?" he asked, with a soft voice. He hesitated a second, and then he replied, "Because no one it did for me, when I needed. It was the only time." He spoke about his past, how his mother died alone in a hospital while he was working overtime, how he could not arrive on time. Lucia said nothing. She just squeezed his hand with force. It was in that moment when she knew what I should to do. He asked his cell phone to Guillermo and recorded a message. "Eva, Ricardo, you left me for dead, but I'm alive, and I know what you did." Then he looked at Valerio. "It's time for the world to also it know." Nodded, with a knot in the throat. There would be no turning back. The plan began that same night. William had access to recordings, old, emails and documents that proved how Eva and Ricardo had manipulated doctors, lawyers, and employees to control the company and get rid of their mother. But one key piece was missing: a confession, direct. Lucia, with the Valerio's help, he pretended to be in critical condition. Guillermo called his sister pretending desperation, saying that they needed see her before she died. Eva fell in the trap. She arrived alone, without warning Ricardo. Valerio had installed hidden cameras in the living room. During the visit, Lucia pretended to be asleep. Eva, believing she was alone with Guillermo, confronted, "Enough with this charade. Mum has been dead for a long time. Days. All that's left is to burn it and be done with it. This at once." His voice was full of contempt. Valerio, from the adjoining room, recorded each word. Up to date next. Eva returned with Ricardo. This time, both of them. Guillermo pretended that Lucia had worsened and they needed to decide what to do. "Let's sign the cremation document. No one you should know what follows." "Here," said Ricardo seriously. Valerio, disguised as a nurse, served coffee with a hidden camera in his hand. The tray. What they recorded was even more chilling. Eve laughed while he said, "Never. I thought it was so easy to get rid of her. If it weren't for that filthy adopted, we would already be celebrating." At that moment, Lucia slowly sat down in the bed. Celebrating what daughter? Eva's face turned white. Ricardo jumped up. "You're dead." Lucia smiled, with serenity, that they thought, but not so much. It's easy to turn off a mother. In seconds, Valerio entered with the cell phone in the hand. "All recorded," he said, "and it's already in the cloud." The reaction was immediate. Eva began to scream, denying everything, while Ricardo tried snatch from him the cell phone to Valerio. But Guillermo already had sent the files to a trusted lawyer. In less than an hour, the police was in the door. Eva and Ricardo were arrested for attempted murder, document forgery, and witness coercion. The news spread like wildfire. In the media locals, "Old woman returns from the death and denunciation of his own children," he said the headline. Lucia, still weak, gave a brief statement from her living room. "They wanted to erase me, but they forgot that true love always finds a way out." Valerio was next to her, and although I hated the attention, he stood firm. He was no longer a simple employee. It was the man who heard a heartbeat when everyone heard silence. The days that followed were chaotic, but also liberating. The family business came under investigation, and the accounts, Eva and Ricardo's bank accounts, were frozen. Guillermo was appointed by Lucia as her legal representative and began to review each contract, each movement suspicious. With the help from lawyers and former lawyers, employees faithful managed to recover the administrative control. Valerio, for his part, resigned from the crematorium. He didn't want to walk through those corridors where an injustice was almost committed irreparable. Instead, he moved into the guest room of Lucia's house. At first, he said it would be temporary, just until she were good. But with heat time, your cup of coffee had a fixed place in the table. Its armchair a blanket of its own, and its name, a place in the prayers Lucia's nightlife. One afternoon, while sweeping her porch, Valerio stopped to look at the large tree that dominated her garden, its thick branches. They shaded a bench where Lucia used to sit down and read. "Always I wanted to be buried here," he said she once, while pointed out the trunk with a calm smile. "No drawers cold, neither ovens empty, under this tree, where life goes on." Valerio, who had never thought about funeral with darling, felt that that wish was fair. He promised in silence that when will arrive the moment that would do reality. But in the meantime, every day with she was a gift. Lucia, although still with after effects, he gradually recovered his energy. He painted, listened to music, and sometimes laughed at his own stumbles, saying that already there was had a death for this life. It was during one of those quiet afternoons that Valerio and Guillermo spoke alone. The young man had changed. His shoulders were no longer droopy, and his voice was firm. "I want to do something more with all this," he said. "Help others who do not have family, who are ignored by the system." Valerio, he looked, surprised but with pride. "A foundation?" he asked. "Something like that, with her name, for children orphans, for abandoned elderly people, for all those who, like me, just needed a second chance." That night, they told Lucia the idea. She cried, not out of sadness, but because for the first time in a long time felt that his life and his almost death had been worth it. "Do it," he said, "but promise me one thing. Never forget that all this began with a note, a gesture, and a heart that still it was beating." The project took shape with unexpected speed. William, with the legal support that now had, achieved convert an old abandoned house into the first reception center. Valerio was in charge of the repairs, painting and even planting new trees in a garden. Lucia, from her chair in the terrace, watched each progress like a proud mother. They named it Casa Latido, Heartbeat House, in honor of what they had saved. Within a few weeks, they began to arrive the first children and the elderly. Hard stories, lost gazes, but also hope. Valerio became the person in charge of the place, although everyone they called him Don Valerio, as if he had always would have been there. It was the first in get up, and the last one in go to bed. "I don't have children," he said, "but I have a house full of life." As the months passed, Lucia's health began to deteriorate, not because of the poison, but because of the natural weight of the time. He accepted his fragility with the same dignity with the one she faced, the betrayal. One morning, he asked William to take you to the tree of the garden. They sat down, the three, she, Guillermo, and Valerio, under the thick shade. "And this is the place," said Lucia with a gentle smile. "And you, the men that life gave me, are my greatest treasure." They handed over an envelope with a handwritten letter. "Open it when I is no longer here." That night, he fell asleep in your bed without pain, without fear, and at dawn, he was gone. No dramatic goodbyes. He just closed the eyes and rested. The funeral was intimate, serene, just like her it would have wanted. There was no coffin, just a white blanket wrapping his body and a circle of people who they loved her. They buried her under the tree, right where she there was pointed out months ago. Valerio dug with his own hands, despite the blisters and the age. Guillermo read the letter that Lucia sent them. There was left, and she spoke of life as a collection of encounters unlikely, of how two strangers, one lost in the street and another lost in the routine, returned the soul. "If they are reading this," he said, "is because my mission ended, but yours is just beginning. May this house never go out, and may my story them. Remember that sometimes, to be reborn, all it takes is someone listen." They passed the years. Casa Latido grew, opened 2 new units in other cities, and began to receive donations from all over the country. Lucia's testimony was published in a book that became a symbol of resistance and humanity. William became a social reference, but it never stopped happening the nights in the same room where his adoptive mother had slept. Valerio already, with more marked grey hair, he continued chopping wood, preparing snacks, telling stories. Sometimes, when he saw a child running through the garden, stopped and closed the eyes for a second. In the murmur of the leaves of the tree, I believed hear Lucia's voice. "Thank you for not leaving me die." And then he smiled, because he knew that she, somehow, was still there, over there. One day, an official letter arrived at the Casa Latido mailbox. It was from City Council. They wanted to declare the land where Lucia was buried as a site of interest. Community. The proposal included preserving the tree, create a small memorial park, and share its history in the schools locals as an example of courage and justice. Guillermo moved, called a meeting with the residents and the team. Everyone voted in favor. For them, it wasn't just a green space, it was the heart of the house. In the inauguration, children, and the elderly. They released white balloons into the sky, and a plaque was placed next to the tree. Here flourished the love that challenged the death. Valerio did not say a lot that day, but stayed until everyone left, stroking the crust from the trunk and whispering "We will do our part, Lucia." With the time, visitors from other places began to arrive, people who had read the book or heard the story in some conference. Some they came with tears, others with questions, but everyone took something away, a seed of hope. The story of Lucia, Guillermo, and Valerio transcended the personal. It became universal, not because there would be morbidity in his tragedy, but because it revealed a profound truth. We all need to be seen, heard, and saved at some point. In an interview, Valerio said something that moved many. "I didn't save Lucia. She saved me. I was just a man invisible, and thanks to her, I found my purpose." Since then, many they began to call Valerio as the guardian of the last heartbeat. That nickname at first, it was embarrassing. It was not felt a hero nor a symbol, but with the time understood that it was not because of what he had fact, but for what he represented. Someone who, even without have none obligation, chose stop, look beyond of the protocol, and listening with a heart. Every time a new child arrived at Casa Latido, Valerio received in the door with a shy smile and a story in their ear, spoke of a woman who defeated the death of a tree that kept secrets, and how, sometimes, a crumpled piece of paper could change everything. The children, they listened as if he were talking about magic, and in a way, it was. The magic of choosing he well, although nobody be looking. One night, while I was sorting some books in the small library in the house, found an old photo inside a notebook. It was a picture of a young Lucia, surrounded by plants and smiling at the sun. Behind it, in firm handwriting, was a phrase written, "The important thing is not to live much, is to live for someone." Valerio stared at the photo for a long time, then the framed and placed on a shelf next to a candle that he lit every night. That corner became in a small altar, not of sadness, but of gratitude. Many of those who lived over there, they passed by, left a flower, a drawing, one word. Nobody, it said out loud, but everyone knew that Lucia was still leading that place, like a flame that never goes out. With the years, Casa Latido was transformed in a small community, self-sustaining. Guillermo organized carpentry, sewing and bakery workshops for senior citizens, while the youths, they learned gardening, reading, and music. They all had a role. Everyone was important. Valerio was in charge of the kitchen by the mornings, and in the afternoons he looked after his garden he had started in memory of Lucia. She said that plants speak, he recalled, and every time a new flower sprouted without explanation, he smiled with complicity. The seasons passed, but the spirit of the place remained intact. It was not an asylum nor an orphanage. It was a shelter, a home made of second beginnings. One day, a journalist came to record a documentary. There was heard the original story and wanted to know what there was past afterward. He spent a whole week interviewing residents, walking through the hallways, talking with William, and finally sitting down with Valerio in banking under the tree. What you would say today to that Valerio who worked alone in a crematorium, without imagining everything that would come? He asked. He took time in answering. He looked at the leaves, swayed gently, and said that sometimes life doesn't need you to do great things. Just pay attention. That day, simply listen a heart. The journalist turned off the camera with tears in the eyes. I knew I couldn't write better. Close that one. The documentary was broadcast on national television and then uploaded to digital platform where millions of people viewed it. They saw the messages of support. They came from everywhere of the world. People counted as the Lucia's story had given strength to reconcile with their parents, to adopt a child, to better care for them grandparent. Casa Latido received more visits, more donation, more hands willing to help. But what Valerio valued most was when someone played the door and said, I came. Because I want to start over. Those words, they remembered that Lucia's legacy was not just the house, nor he tree, nor the documentary. It was that impulse to look at the other with compassion. Autumn afternoon. William found Valerio sitting in front of a leaf in white, with a pen in the hand. "What do you write?" he asked. "My story," he replied, without taking his eyes off the paper. "Not Lucia's, nor yours, mine. I want leave something written. Just in case someone, you need to know that change is possible, even when you think that already there's nothing left." Guillermo sat down next to her, silent. He brought her a tea hot and said no more. I knew that those words were not only for others, also were for him. Because although Lucia had been his savior, Valerio had been his foundation, and they both knew that the story's true ones do not end. They multiply. With he passed of the overtime, Valerio became a legendary, a figure within Casa Latido. New residents heard about him before meeting him, as if he were a character taken from a story. But when they saw, shirt rolled up, faded cap, and a clumsy smile, they gave each other realized that there was no myth at all, just a man who had learned to love without measure. Each birthday was celebrated with a cake made by the children, a drawing, an improvised song. "I never had family," he used to say with a broken voice, "but now I have too many. Grandchildren to count." Her eyes were moist, but not from sadness. They were tears of fullness. One night when it was raining heavily, there was a blackout throughout the area. The little ones were scared, and some seniors also. Valerio, without hesitating, he turned on a flashlight and began to count the Lucia's story, from day one in crematorium. The did calmly, tenderly, with precise silences. Everyone sat down around as if it were a campfire invisible. When he reached the moment of the hidden note, his voice lowered and put the hand in the chest. "That was the moment when your heart spoke to me, and I decided listen to it." When finished, already nobody had fear, because in that darkness, a certainty shone. They were together, they were alive, and as long as they listened to each other, nothing that would turn off. After that night, Valerio became also in the official narrator of Casa Latido. Every Saturday at dusk, they organized what they called the Heartbeat Hour, a moment where everyone gathered to share memories, tell anecdotes, or simply listen. It wasn't mandatory, but almost nobody was missing. It they did under the tree, in silence or with laughter, depending of the encouragement. One day, an 8-year-old girl years that there were arrived. After losing her parents, she approached Valerio and he said, Do you think my mum? He also speaks to me from the sky like Lucia." He didn't hesitate. He bent down, took and hands and him, he replied, "I don't have none doubt." The girl. He smiled, as if he had just recovered something lost. And Valerio understood that sometimes a single phrase could be a life jacket. One morning, while watered the plants of the garden, Valerio felt a slight dizziness. It wasn't dramatic or alarming, just a moment of weakness. He leaned in the shovel and waited for it to pass. But that night, for the first time in a lot time, he did not come down. To dinner, Guillermo went up to look for him and found asleep in his bed with a notebook open on the chest. In the first page had written, "If you are reading, this is because my time has come. Don't cry. I didn't leave. I just changed shape." There were no screams or wailing, just hugs, silence, and the certainty that she had gone in peace, like Lucia, like those who had already, they fulfilled his mission. Valerio's funeral was so simple, like him it would have liked. No dark suits, no long speeches, just a blanket embroidered by the children, soft songs, and a wooden box made by their own companions of the carpentry workshop. They buried him next to Lucia, under the same tree, as if fate had always reserved that place. William placed a stone between them, carved with a phrase that Valerio used to repeat, "Listen the heartbeat, there begin life." That day, nobody cried with desperation. They cried with gratitude, because they had met a man who them he taught that love does not need blood, only determination. With the time, the tree grew stronger. The roots intertwined between the two graves, and white flowers began to sprout around, as if the land same will honor what is there was resting. Casa Latido continued forward, more alive than ever. Each new resident knew the history from day one, and although not everyone believed at first, it was enough to look at the eyes of those who they lived to understand that it was not a story. It was true, a truth that had borne of the pain, of abandonment, but also of the value of listening. Because that day, when Valerio felt a pulse in a cold hand, not only saved a life, it saved many. Guillermo, now with grey hair in the temples, took he definitive leadership of Casa Latido. He preserved every corner just as it was. There was built with Valerio and Lucia, but also innovated, opened job reintegration programs, alliances with universities, and up to a little recording studio where residents could tell their stories in audio. He said that memory should not depend only on paper, but also on voice. Once a year, in the date Valerio found Lucia alive, they celebrated the Day of the Heartbeat. It was not a party, but a ritual. Everyone placed a candle in a tree, shared a simple meal, and then sat down to listen, a message engraving that Lucia had left. Some, they closed the eyes, others they cried in silence, but everyone remembered. On one occasion, an international television network wanted to buy the rights to make a series based in the history. William, it thought for weeks. I knew I could help expand the message, but also I was afraid that will transform in a superficial drama. In the end, he accepted with one condition, that all actors were real people who had experienced reintegration or abandonment processes. The project was an unexpected success. The series was called The Last Heartbeat and toured festivals around the world. But the most important thing was not fame nor the awards. It was that after each screening, lines of people formed who wanted talk, confess, forgive, start over. Casa Latido had planted something that could no longer be stopped. One afternoon, many years then, a woman with hair white and slow walking stopped in front of the tree. It was Eva, Lucia's biological daughter. There was released from prison after achieve his sentence, and according to they knew, she had lived in silence, far away of the world, with barely necessary. Some were surprised to see her, others felt angry. But William received without words, with just a chair and a glass of water. Eve sat in front of the two graves and was there for hours. No one came near, no one interrupted. When fell the night, stood up, left a flower among the roots of the tree, and muttered something that only he would manage to hear. Then he left and was never seen again, saw again, but that gesture, in the midst of so much pain past, was a seed of redemption. Guillermo did not speak of the topic with nobody, just scored in his diary. Forgiveness is not always needs words. Sometimes a presence is enough. Years after, when he also grew old, decided leave the Casa Latido management in the hands of a new generation. There was young people who had arrived there like lost children and now were purposeful adults. He stayed on as an advisor, as a guardian figure. His hair turned white, his gait slower, but his gaze still firm. Every morning passed by the tree, he greeted in a low voice and made sure the flowers were fresh. It was her way of saying, "We are still here, we are still beating." With he passed of the time, letters began to arrive from different parts of the world. People who had seen the series, read the book or heard the history in some remote corner. Some were looking for help. Others offered donations, but many simply, they wrote to say, "Thank you." In one of those letters, an 11-year-old girl, years in Poland, he wrote, "After meeting Lucia, I decided to take better care of my grandmother." Another, from Argentina, said, "I want to be like Valerio when I grow up." Guillermo Las. He kept them all in a locked wooden box. It was his treasure. You're a constant reminder that the echo of what we've experienced isn't lost. It just transforms. Casa Latido was no longer just a place. It was a symbol. One day, while I was walking along the orchard, a boy of just 6 years old ran towards William with a drawing in the hand. "Look, this is you with the Lady of the Tree and the Lord of the Flashlight," he said, pointing the colorful doodles. Guillermo hugged with strength. "And what are doing?" he asked. "Are you listening?" he replied, "He child." And that was the answer perfect, because in the end it all came down to that. Listening, he pain, silence, scream, hope, not to pass by, to stop. Because that day, many years ago, a man lonely, he touched a hand that should have been cold and found a heartbeat. In the most important anniversaries, Casa Latido opened its doors to the community for a special day of remembrance and action. Every corner from the place became at a station interactive. The living room was filled with photographs old. The dining room offered dishes cooked by the own residents. And under the tree, visitors could hear Lucia's voice narrating fragments of her life in headphones. That recording, carefully kept, was the heart of the event. Many were ending crying, others they closed the eyes in silence, but all, without exception, they came out different, because there you didn't just go to look, you went to feel. On one of those days, a young volunteer who had been collaborating for months approached Guillermo at the end of the day. He told her that he had arrived there looking for experience for his career in social work, but had found something much deeper. "It's not about helping here," he said. "Here you learn to love. Guillermo, I'm listening with attention, and you..." He replied something that Valerio used to repeat: "Whoever enters this house with, he heart open, never comes out with empty-handed." The girl smiled, and before leaving, she left in the testimonials mural a small note. "Thank you, Lucia, for living on in all of us." Testimonial wall had become a tradition. Every visitor, resident, or a volunteer left there a phrase, a photo, a drawing, or simply a thought. There was no rules, just truth. Some notes were heartbreaking, others were full of humor, but they all had something in common. They came from the soul. Guillermo used to walk through that mural every Sunday afternoon. Sometimes he would stop in front of one in particular, written by a young man who had overcome abandonment. "Here nobody asked me that I did. They asked me that I was dreaming." Others, sometimes, he would stare at the photograph of Valerio with his crooked cap and his shy smile. That one face continued teaching, even in silence. One day, one of the teenage residents asked why they had never made a sculpture of Lucia. Guillermo did it, thought seriously. "Because Lucia is in all of this," he replied, pointing his garden, the kitchen, the tree, the mural. "But if you want, we can do something that represents her." And so was born He Project Collective. Each person would make a piece of pottery with something that reminded them of her. Some molded flowers, others hearts, others small trees. The parts were placed around from the trunk, forming a colorful circle. When they finished, a child little said, "Now yes, she can see us from all sides." Nobody had contradicted, because everyone knew it was true. Every time someone subscribes, another history, find a home, be a part of it, subscribe to the channel. The years they passed and Casa Latido continued growing, not only in size, but in impact. Universities do it. They used it as a case study. Therapists recommended to families in crisis. And governments, they asked consultancies to replicate the model in others' regions. But despite so much expansion, the spirit of the place remained intact. William attributed this to the original promise, not to convert in an institution, but in a home. Each new member was welcomed with a simple question: "What do you need to beat again?" The answer: it varied, but the look was always the same, that of someone who still had hope. One day, in the middle of a sunny afternoon, an elderly couple arrived at the gate. No one the eye knew, but they brought a small suitcase and a letter in the hand. William them received in person. They were the grandparents of a young man who had lived there years ago and that there was dead tragically in an accident. "He spoke to us everyday days of this place," they said. "When left, We felt like we were losing a part of him too, but coming here, it's like hugging him again. Guillermo invited them in without further questions, offered tea, Les showed he tree, and that same evening already, they had a room ready, because at Casa Latido, grief also found shelter. That night, after going to bed, William went out into the garden and sat under the tree. The sky, it was clear, full of stars, and the breeze gently moved the leaves like a whisper old, closed. The eyes and remembered every face, every story, every step that took him had brought him there. He thought in Lucia, in Valerio, in that first day in her crematorium. He thought in his fear, in rage, in his miracle of a heartbeat, and in how, without wanting it, there was inherited a mission much bigger than him. In a low voice he murmured, "Thanks, Mom," because to him, Lucia wasn't just who it had saved, it was who there was taught to save others. Up to date next, gathered the entire team and residents in his patio. He announced that, although would remain linked to Casa Latido, there was arrived the time to leave the general coordination. Their faces were filled with surprise, some with concern, but William reassured with a serene smile, "This doesn't depend on one person. It depends on love with that each of you surrender. I was just one more. Now it's your turn." He named 3 young as new responsible from the place, all of them former residents trained and committed, and at the end of the meeting, with a firm voice said, "Lucia taught us not to give up. Valerio taught us to listen. Let none of us forget that." The transition, it was calm, almost natural. The new coordinators contributed fresh ideas, improved processes and expanded alliances, but never they played it essential, the soul of the place. Guillermo was still present, walking among the gardens, talking with residents, teaching the little ones how to plant seeds, but now it toward with more calm, like someone already fulfilled and just watches. Sometimes they found him asleep in banking under the tree with an open book in the chest. Others, sometimes I wrote letters by hand that later left hidden in the library books, waiting for someone. I found them by chance. They were short letters with phrases like, "Don't have fear, already will pass," or "Your story, it's not over yet." Nobody knew how many there was, but every time, someone I found one, the heart is in them filled with light. One morning, during a school visit, a child you asked William if it was true that I had seen someone coming back from the death. All the adults stayed silently, waiting for his answer. He smiled, bent down and said, "Not exactly. What I saw was someone come back to life." The boy frowned, confused. "Isn't that the same?" Guillermo looked tenderly. "No, to die is to stop breathing, but to stop living, that you can happen to anyone who stops loving, feeling, fighting. And Lucia, she never stopped living. She just needed someone that listened." The child nodded, as if understood everything, and hugged his teacher. Sometimes, the deepest truths fit in bodies small ones. With he passed of the time, the new generations that grew up inside and outside Casa Latido began to see that the story of Lucia, Valerio and Guillermo was not seen as a legend, but as a living legacy. Groups of young people were organized volunteers who traveled to other cities to share the model, give talks in schools, and form support networks community. The motto they carried, the slogan on their t-shirts was simple but powerful: listen, feel, accompany. They carried a seed to every place they went of the heartbeat house tree. The they planted in squares, hospital courtyards, foster homes, and next to them, they placed a plaque that said, "Here also can flourish love, one." Afternoon, already older and with his body more fragile, William was invited to see one of those trees planted in a city neighbor that helped to get off the vehicle, and it guided in wheelchair up to the small plaza. Upon arriving, he found a group of children singing a song that spoke of a woman who did not want die, from a man who listened, and from a healing home hearts. Guillermo closed the eyes and let the music wrapped. In that moment, he felt that everything had been worth it. That every tear, every fear, every night on watch, it had brought to that moment. And as I looked at the tree, so young but so firm, she knew the legacy was safe. Upon returning to Casa Latido, Guillermo asked Paz a moment alone in a garden. The residents, already accustomed to their silence's rituals, they respected his space. He walked slowly to the original tree, the one that had witnessed everything. He sat down in the bank and supported the hand on the land, right between the two. "Graves." "We did, Mom. We're still doing it," she murmured. She felt a gentle gust of wind, like a caress, and closed the eyes. Inside, there was no sadness, only a deep peace, the kind of calm that comes when one knows that one has complement with everything he owed. He remained there until the sun set, with the sun painting the orange sky and the leaves whispering names that only your heart understood. Few days later, William fell ill. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. It was just that his body began to fade with sweetness, like a candle that has lit up a lot and no longer needs to burn. The doctors said it was natural wear and tear, and he didn't want treatments aggressive. "Just let me be home," he asked. And so it was. It installed in a room overlooking the garden, surrounded by books, letters, drawings and flowers. Every day he received visits, hugs, songs, and every night someone would sit and read to him. Sometimes they laughed, sometimes they cried, but above all there was love, a deep, serene, unwavering love, fear, because everyone knew that when Will arrived the moment William wouldn't leave, he would just transform. The last day, the darling. It was clear. William asked for them to open the window. The wind entered softly, bringing with it the scent of the orange trees of the garden. I had the eyes closed, but she was smiling. One of the caregivers, with tears in her eyes, asked if I wanted to say something. He murmured barely audibly. "Thank you for listening." These were his last words. There was no pain, no struggle, just a deep sigh and rest. The clock marked the same hour in which, decades ago, Valerio had uncovered Lucia's pulse. As if everything was starting over again, it buried next to Lucia and Valerio, completing a perfect circle. 3 graves under the same tree, 3 stories united by love and resilience. The ceremony. It was intimate, but full of emotion. Children, the elderly, volunteers, visitors, everyone left something on her grave. A flower, a letter, a drawing. Nobody spoke out loud, but the silence said everything. A girl, little one, when she finished, approached the tree, hugged with his tiny arms and said, "Thank you for not leaving her die," then ran toward his mother, leaving behind only the simplest truth, that one life can change the world, if someone stops to listen. After the funeral, Casa Latido organized a day of celebration in honor of William. But it wasn't a solemn event nor sad. It was a day of joy, games, songs, and home-cooked food. They were placed photographs yours all over the place, watering plants, laughing with the children, peeling potatoes, or sleeping with a book in the chest. Every corner, it seemed, whisper his name. In the dining room, they painted a mural with his face smiling, and the phrase he repeated the most, "Listen can save a life." And just below, they left space in blank for each new resident to write what there was taught. With the years, that mural became in a rainbow of sincere words. The story of Casa Latido began to be told in universities, seminars, conferences, and even in school books. But within its walls, it was still as alive as the first day. Every time someone came and asked, "Who was it, Lucia?" he didn't say. They responded with dates or biographies. They told him as he smiled, how he prepared coffee with cinnamon, how he laughed with mouth open, and when they asked for Valerio, they said it was he first in stop, that without him nothing would have been possible. And if they asked about William, that the answer was even simpler. He was his son, who chose stay. And with that, it was enough. Because at Casa Latido, the big names lived in small gestures. One day, one of the new residents, a teenager who had arrived after life in home storms and streets difficult, sat under the tree and wrote in his notebook, "Here they didn't ask me where I came from, I'm coming. They asked me where one arrive." That phrase became so powerful that it was recorded on a plate and installed in the entrance of the place. Visitors to it. They read when they arrived and when they left. And many they confessed that they had changed the way of looking at the others, because in that sight, your past didn't matter. It mattered that you were ready to beat again. Every anniversary, a special ceremony called the planting was held. Of the heart, children and adults wrote their fears, hopes or wounds in small papers biodegradable, which then they buried in his garden while they planted new flowers. It was a symbolic act, but deeply healing. Some, they cried while doing it. Others, they laughed. But they all felt that something was being renewed. A woman major who had arrived after losing her husband, she once said, "I never imagined I would feel alive again." And it all started with a flower. That was the magic of Casa Latido. It didn't promise to erase the pain, but yes, offered fertile land to plant a new one history. The little ones, they said that the tree spoke, that if one stayed very reserved with the ear attached to the trunk, could hear him tell secrets. The adults smiled with tenderness when listening those stories, but no one the denied. Because in he background, everyone knew that the tree was special. Their pains had been healed, births celebrated, lives said goodbye to, and hopes. It wasn't just wood and leaves, it was living memory. On its branches hung colorful ribbons with names written by hand, and in its base, small stones painted with drawings, children's. Every detail he spoke of those who passed through there and those who would come. One afternoon, a group of young people volunteers decided to write a play based in the original story. They didn't want fame or awards, just to share what they had felt. The play was called The Woman Who Came Back and was presented in the square of the town. The cast was made up of residents, volunteers, and neighbors. When termed the function, the audience did not applaud immediately. They stayed silently, processing the excitement, and then, like a wave, they burst the applause, the hugs, tears. Many, they said it was like seeing their own life represented, because everyone, in at some point, they had needed someone I would look at them eyes and say, "I believe you, I am here." With he passed of the. Over time, a network of homes inspired by Casa Latido emerged. In each city where a new one was founded, coordinators, they would visit the original tree to take a seed, a photo, or simply the blessing of the place. It was not a formal requirement, but it became in a tradition respected. Upon returning, they planted a new tree, and him they counted the story of Lucia, Valerio, and Guillermo. They said that this is how his spirit was traveling with them. Some of these houses were called North, Heartbeat, Lucia Refuge, or Valerio Vive. Each one with your style, but all with the same heart, to provide a second chance. In an interview, one of the new leaders of a home in the south of the country said, "We are not saviors, we are witnesses. Witnesses of what is happening when someone feels seen for the first time." That phrase went around social media and motivated thousands of people to get involved in community causes. There was no shortage of them, the skeptics, those who said, it was just welfare disguised as poetry. But those who had lived in Casa Latido or in any of her sisters, they knew the true. It wasn't about charity, it was about dignity, about remembering that no one is ever completely broken, while is someone willing to sit beside him in silence. In the Casa Latido library, an entire shelf was dedicated to the stories of those who had passed by there. Hundreds of notebooks full of stories, drawings, poems, and letters. No one the sorted by topic or by author, they were there to be discovered. Some nights, residents would gather to read them out loud. They laughed, they cried, they hugged each other. Once, a young man who did not speak almost never took a random notebook and read in a low voice. If you are reading, this is because you survived. It doesn't matter how, it matters that you're still here. Then Hilly Notebook raised the view and smiled for the first time. That moment remained recorded in all. T excited this part. Then you don't go without subscribing. This channel lives on thanks to people like you. A local artist, moved by the history, proposed create a mosaic in the outer wall of the place. He invited everyone to participate. Each one placed a piece of pottery with a message, a symbol or a color that represents your I pass by there. The mural took months to be completed, but when it did, it was as if the building would have taken on new life. From a distance, a female figure could be seen hugging a heart beating, surrounded by branches, eyes open and outstretched hands. It was Lucia, but it was also every person I had chosen to love without conditions. It was a living work of art, and those who they passed by there, even if they didn't know the full story, they felt that something important had happened within those walls. A journalist, after visiting Casa Latido for a report, wrote in his column, "In a world that sometimes seems so noisy, there is a place where silence does not scare because it is full of listening." That phrase was reproduced in thousands of publications, programs and conferences. But within the home, nobody. He was talking about fame. What mattered was that, thanks to that history, more hearts were finding solace. Some new residents, they arrived without knowing what his name was, the place. But they knew that there they felt at peace. It was as if Lucia's soul whispered in your ear that everything would be good. Once a year, in the anniversary of the first time Valerio felt that heartbeat, the residents lit a large candle in the center of the patio. Each person took a small candle that lit up with that main flame and said out loud a word that I would like to sow. Hope, forgiveness, courage, home. That night, the yard shone like a darling starry, and when all the candles were lit, I read out loud the original note, "Please don't cremate me." It was a brutal and beautiful reminder that even in the moments more dark, a spark can change everything. The text of that note was framed and hung in the main entrance, right next to Valerio's phrase, "Listen can save a life." Many visitors stopped to read both messages before entering. Some they did in silence, others with tears. It was like crossing an invisible threshold between the noise of the world and the stillness of a healing place. The most curious children asked who had written the note, and when they said it was Guillermo, hiding her in their mother's clothes to save her, they opened the eyes with amazement. Then he was also a hero, they said, and everyone nodded. One afternoon, as a storm approached, a young woman, newly arrival, took refuge under the tree. She was soaked, shivering, without say word. A volunteer sat next to her, without press it. They passed almost an hour in silence, until the young she said, "I thought no one was ever going to look for me." The volunteer replied without looking, "We were waiting for you." It was a simple but powerful moment, because that was Casa Latido, a refuge that needed no questions, just presence. A promise silent that no one, no matter how broken they felt, was alone, and that while had someone willing to listen, always there would be a way out. With the years, many of the children who had grown at Casa Latido, they returned already adults, with their own children or projects. Some became in volunteers, others in professionals who offered free services, and a few simply they came to sit under the tree in silence. One of them, now a doctor, brought a plaque with an engraved phrase, "All that I am began with someone who didn't leave me die in loneliness." He placed it next to the roots, where now were resting 3 lives that had marked hundreds. That phrase summed up what everyone felt, although not always could put it in words. A group of young artists created a song based in the Lucia's story. The lyrics spoke of a forgotten woman, a silent man and a son who chose stay. The melody turned anthem among those who they knew the story. It sounded on every anniversary, at every farewell, and at every welcome. It was a way of transmitting by word of mouth what had happened, born in a crematorium and flowerbed in a garden. "Please don't cremate me," was the chorus. And it wasn't just about fire and death. It was about not being ignored, not being discarded, about wanting to live, about needing to be seen. It was a song of life. One night, during a special guided tour, an elderly woman who had recently lost her daughter asked to stay alone for a few minutes in his garden. He walked slowly to the tree, knelt down with difficulty, and supported his forehead against the trunk. No one the interrupted. Later, when he rejoined the group, he said with a calm voice, "She didn't leave completely. It's in the love that I have left." That phrase became another of the many that were recorded in the mural at the entrance, because Casa Latido also taught to say goodbye, to understand that the goodbye is not always the end, but the beginning of another form of presence. Years later, when it was fulfilled, the 50th anniversary of the symbolic resurrection of Lucia, a special ceremony was held. People came from all over the country, some already older, others who were children when it all began. There was generations brought together by a story that had saved lives. In that occasion, a 7-year-old girl, years old, granddaughter of one of the first residents, climbed into the small improvised stage and read a poem I had written in secret. They say that the heart does boom pum because he is calling. Here, when you listen, someone always answers. Nobody could contain the tears, because those words they said, without embellishment, what Casa Latido had meant since the first beat. A place where always there would be an answer. With he, past of the time. Some, they started saying that Casa Latido was a miracle, but those who, they lived from within, they knew it wasn't magic. It was decision. It was choosing. Stop. Choose to look. Choose stay when all the others were leaving. That was what Valerio did. That was what William did. And that was what they followed, making, in each story, who they took the relief. Because, in the background, the legacy was not the walls, nor the tree, nor the plates. It was the manner in which each new person was received, with respect, with love, with listen. And although Lucia was no longer there, nor Valerio, nor Guillermo, her history continued beating in every daily gesture, in the hot soup served with darling, in the flower that someone watered every morning, in the letter that appeared between the pages of a book. And every time a new heart, it always arrived broken, there was someone who knew that listen. It went without saying a lot. It was enough with being, because the elderly lesson that there was left Lucia was not there in his miraculous return, but in the way he chose live after, with bravely, with tenderness, with true. Today, as you pass by the gate of Casa Latido, you can still hear the murmur of laughter, of footsteps, of stories. The colors of the mural shine in the sun, the ribbons in he tree move with he wind, and the voices of the children fill the air is alive. Visitors stop, some without knowing why. But when cross the door, something changes. It doesn't matter if they come out of curiosity or necessity. Always find it same. A pause, a sigh, a space where they can be seen without trial, and where, perhaps for the first time, he asks them, "How is your heart?" Because that is the most powerful inheritance that Lucia left, not a fortune, nor a surname, not a big one feat. What he left behind was a reminder, simple and eternal, that a heart doesn't need to beat loudly to be heard. It just needs someone to approach carefully, with respect, and really listen. And in that gesture, apparently minimal, radically human, gives birth to everything. A story, a house, a family, a new life is born. It is enough listen, enough with stay. Just feel the heartbeat. If you got this far, make this message follow beating. Subscribe, share, and help us keep this alive mission.